Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 54. We're going to talk today about tractor needs. I'm Morgan Hayes, assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at the University of Kentucky. In my personal life, I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky. With my husband, we have a commercial cattle and hay operation.
And I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering as well, where I focus on precision livestock farming in my personal life. Also raise registered Angus cattle and focus on some goat production.
Okay, Josh. So before we get started with our topic today, which is tractor needs, let's talk a little bit about what's been happening on the farm.
So we've been putting some more equipment back together. We got one sent off. So we did go through and do a diagnostic and figure out, the clutch is probably going. So figured that out, got that one ready to get sent off, got some other equipment, getting stuff put back together, and then still putting out some hay. Weren't able to move the cows as soon as we hoped because of just fencing challenges on our other farm. Just all that bad weather we had. We didn't think it was as bad as it was. But then we walked the line and saw that it was indeed going to be a challenge.
Yeah, there actually seems to be some money through Farm Service Agency right now for cleanup from some of these high wind events that we've had. So if people around here aren't familiar, that's something you could talk to your local FSA office about. You can note enough value damage over $1,000, and you have to have some fencing repair equipment and some time and some other things, or some cleanup if you have a barn that's blown over, not onto the spot where the barn itself was sitting, but into your fields, and that cleanup efforts as well. All of that comes into play. So certainly there's a little bit of money out there for people that are dealing with problems.
Similar issues and challenges. So it's just one of those a lot of practical aspects. I think we're down to, we only have about 4 cows left to calve at this point. So most of them have gone fairly smoothly. We did have, like I said, a couple twins several weeks ago. So that's been pretty much what's going on. We're just waiting. We did get some sheep over the weekend.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
The little ones like the sheep.
The little ones love the sheep. So for some reason, they so about the goats, but man, they love with the sheep.
There you go. Yeah, we also are cleaning up fence lines. All of our animals are out on grass now. And we also are sort of making sure as we move people through that all the fences are intact before we move into new fields. We're doing pretty well on that, but there's always work to do on checking fence lines anyway. And then on top of the weather we had early this spring, it's been a little bit of extra work this year.
Additional challenges.
Yeah, my husband took out a skid steer to one of the farms and really cleaned up a lot of stuff with the skid steer. And anywhere that it wasn't in a fence line but was awkward, just pushed it out to the side so that we can at least come in and bush hog them. Tried to make some piles that are taken care of at a later date.
Right.
And got up some temporary fences in some spots as well. So everything is out on grass at this point.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing right now. It keeps down the labor demands. We also have 4 cows left to calve, 1 heifer, 3 cows.
Okay.
And they just keep cranking along. So for us, that's pretty good because realistically, we were about 75% of the way through our calving at the 1 month mark in our 60-day window. So 30 days in.
Most of them had already.
We had a good majority.
Knocked out. So
yep.
Great.
Yeah, so that's good. Still checking twice a day. Because one of them is going to hang on to the bitter end, guaranteed. That's what's going to happen. So,
you guys had some equipment that was sent off, I think, a while ago.
We did. We had a track.
Yet, or?
Interestingly, no. It was supposed to come back, and in getting checked to come back, they found another issue that we hadn't identified earlier, and that's that our fuel tank was not actually strapped correctly. And it's a lot of work to get in underneath the fuel tank to restrap it. But that's an important thing because having the fuel tank fall out from under the tractor while it's driving through the field is not a good idea. So that was something that had to be handled before it could come back to us.
Okay, yeah, definitely stop your day. If you
that would stop your day and your month probably, and you'd have a lot of And it's a lot of money too. Even think
yeah.
how much fuel's in that tank. If it
Yeah, that's definitely. I know some of our big tractors is a 40-gallon tank almost, so
exactly,
it can add up very, very quickly.
and that is our baling tractor. So it's really important that we have it right before we get into the hayfield. So
Okay.
so that's one more week here probably that it's going to be out for, but it is what it is.
Yep. Just get it done right and hopefully get it back and just be able to have some smooth sailing.
Yep, and this is a perfect time for us to transition to our topic today, which is tractors, because for us, this is one of our key tractors. So having it down for the season is not acceptable. We have a second tractor that can run the baler, a little bit smaller, but it's a challenge on that smaller tractor to run that baler.
Okay.
So for us, this is the tractor we prefer to be using for baling hay. I don't know about you. Let's talk a little bit about. First, tell me how many tractors you have and what size they are.
So we have 3 tractors. So, we run a fair amount of ground, but we have 3. So one smaller tractor, it's about 60 horsepower. One medium-sized tractor is about moderately sized tractor, 95 horsepower, and another one's about 120.
Okay.
And so the 121 doesn't have a loader or anything. It's just a workhorse or draft tractor. But the other one that's actually, although we use as a baler tractor, is actually the 95 horsepower. Did have a cab for the longest time. As things go through the years, we lost that AC capabilities due to cost of repair. And we use that one. That's our put out hay. That's our one we use pretty much dynamically throughout the farm. And then our smaller tractors, any smaller jobs, anything. And it was, that was our primary tractor. The 60 horsepower was our primary tractor for a large number of years. So probably for 15 years, that was our only tractor. And so, but we had a smaller baler then. We only had a 4x5 baler at that point. And so we have 3, and that seems to work for us right now. But if one goes down, we should be able to make the other 2 work for us. And that's kind of been cover the gap.
We technically have 5 tractors, but only 4 have ever been in rotation. We have one tractor that's a project. So I don't want to count that tractor as part of our rotation. We have it with the intention to get it running to be a 5th tractor. And that largest tractor that does not run at all is 110, 115 horse. Ideally, we will get that one running because that would allow us to buy a larger hay bine.
Okay.
And for us, for our hay operation, we need bines. We need something that's going to crush the leaves and stems on all of our hays so that they dry more evenly. Because we sell that hay, we can't risk having wet spots in there and some dusty areas in our bales. So that's important for us if we wanted to size up in our equipment for hay. Until then, we use hay bines, which are much lower input than disc bines. A little slower to run, but also a little bit lower horsepower to operate. We operate our hay bines on our 65 horsepower tractor, 68 horse. And that one is our secondary if we have to bale with it, because we do use a 4x5 baler. So we can run it with that 65, 68 horse tractor. That one does not have a loader on it. It's our only non-loader tractor.
Okay.
Our larger tractor that we typically bale with, the one that's in for repair right now, is about 75 to 80 horse. That one does have a loader. We take a loader off when we use it for baling. In fact, we leave the loader off almost all the time, but sometimes in the winter, it's nice to have a bigger tractor with a loader, depending on where we're putting out hay and what size bales we're moving. Sometimes for the heavier 5x5 bales, it's nice to have that bigger tractor. But in general, that one is our baling tractor, and it's also our one that runs our 15-foot bush hog.
Okay.
Our batwing gets run with the larger tractor. It's even a push to run it on that tractor. Ideally, that big tractor is going to run a disc bine and the bigger bush hog for most of the summer. That'll be its tasks if it ever gets finished. But, nothing ever gets done in a timely fashion. So, and then we have 2 small tractors. And when we say small tractors, I mean small tractors. We have them, they're just under 50 horse. And those are specifically there for us for hay moving. They're small, agile tractors, language. And we use them to load hay in and out of our hoop barns.
Okay.
As well, one of them is typically what's taken out to the field to load hay onto wagons. So we will have one loading wagons and one unloading wagons.
I was assuming you guys use your skid steer unload.
We try not to use the skid steer to unload only because it's pretty cumbersome. And if we have a long hoop barn to feed in, it's slower. We will use the skid steer if one of those two smaller tractors goes down, which has happened before. But if both of them are operational, we will leave one tractor on each end, one to load, one to unload. Those are our standard unloading, loading hay tractors. The other thing I will say is we have operations in 3 spots, 3 different we have 4 farms, 3 different locations where we have equipment. So typically we will have at least one of those in the wintertime to load hay for sale at the primary spot, and then we will have a second one of those small tractors at one of our other operations to put hay out onto feed pads there. Those small tractors are, I don't know what term you would use, but we describe tractors as sipping fuel and ones that guzzle fuel.
Yes.
And these small tractors sip fuel. So from an efficiency standpoint, if it's not too much work for the tractor, it's much nicer to use the smaller tractors for a lot of these tasks because we just don't use as much fuel.
Yep.
And they tend to do a really good job maneuvering in these smaller barns. I won't say that you won't catch a hoop barn, like the fabric in it with the spear on one, but you're a little bit better sensitivity on the loader controls and things like that. And it's harder to shove a spear through the fabric in there with these smaller tractors. So for a couple reasons we use them. They turn a little bit easier if people drive in and don't give quite enough space to make the turns outside of the barn, but before their equipment, their truck, trailer, whatever. Most of our people that are regulars are very good about it, but occasionally if someone comes in that's not familiar with how the operation works and they just park right up against the side of a hoop barn and you're trying to turn inside a 32-foot hoop and you cannot do it with the 90 or the
nope.
It's just physically impossible. But with the smaller 45, 50 horse tractor, you potentially can turn inside there. It's not a K-turn. It's like a ping pong ball trying to get turned around inside there, but you can do it, which is important. So
right, a little more maneuverability. And yeah, for us, that bigger, like our 95, it's the one with the loader on there, and it's our only one with the loader, so we have to use that and the skid steer really for us to move hay effectively. So we've done it a little bit of both ways. If it's really dry in the summertime, we'll sometimes send the skid steer out there. It depends on what we have hooked up and what's readily available to move. We've unloaded with the John Deere. We've loaded with the John Deere. We've done it with the skid steer as well. For us, it's just trying to figure out, where equipment is. And we've used our other big tractor as well. But like I said, it's our 120 can unload, load and unload hay. It's just a lot more of a guzzler.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's not necessary. Like if it's not necessary to have that extra horsepower, sometimes it feels excessive to use a piece of equipment like that. I'll say that like for a bush hog, it'd be hard to oversize your tractor for a bush hog. You could do it certainly. Like if you put a 200 horse on a 5-foot bush hog, you'd overpower the bush hog. But generally for like a 15-foot or a 12-foot, any of these bigger bush hog, it'd be hard to oversize it for most of the tractors we see around here. I don't want to say you can't because I'm sure there's someone out there that can and does.
Takes it as a challenge, yeah.
Yeah, but generally I think that's a more difficult one. I would think though for things like a hay rake or we use a tedder for some of our hay, those types of equipment you could oversize pretty aggressively if you put a really large tractor in front of them.
And we have used, because there was a couple times our smaller tractor has gone down and we had to go out for repairs. And so that was a challenge where we had to use our big guzzler, 120 horsepower 2 rake. And so we had a 14-wheel rake. And even though it's a big rake, it's still, it can be pulled by the 60 horsepower tractor.
Right.
And so we didn't need that big bulker machine there to, just pretty much take up all the fuel you have.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes, it's a necessity if something is broken. That's why we almost have to have that buffer, a little bit buffer capacity, just so we can have that be dynamic and make sure our hay can get up when we need it to.
Yeah, and we have we actually got the second 4550 horsepower tractor just a couple of years ago. It's probably not a necessity, but it makes it more efficient for us. So we will typically still be baling hay and we'll already be hauling hay in.
Okay.
The way our operation works, we try to be really efficient about getting hay in, especially if we think rain's coming. So we have enough family that can help in that process, and thank goodness they do help in that process. That my husband usually runs the baler, but I will manage the hay logistics, I guess, for lack of a better descriptor on it, to get everything in while he's still finishing up baling. So it's a little bit of a trial that we've had, but we have at times only had that one small tractor, and it does slow us down. Even with the skid steer doing the unloading, the skid steer is just slower than the tractors are.
Yep. And see, we actually do all of ours kind of as a batch process because we have our one big loader tractor. Our one loader tractor is hauling the baler. Typically.
Okay. Yep.
And so we run it that way, and our smaller tractors then use with the rake. And so we pretty much get one day for rake and bale, and the next day hopefully move hay. And so it slows us down, and we're also just challenged on labor. Well.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of each operation has a little different demand on it and then a little bit different decisions. But I will say that for the size that we are, I think we have probably more tractors than I would expect to see. Maybe one more. I would think 4 would be a very appropriate number for the amount of hay that we're baling and the number of locations where we're baling and feeding hay in the winter. Being at 3 tractors was actually too tight for us with the number of locations where we feed hay in the winter.
Right. I see that if you're at 4 locations, 3 or 4 locations.
Sure. So it just is a little bit different dynamic, I think, on different farms and how they operate. But the one thing I will say is that the more tractors you have, the more tractors you have to maintain.
Yes.
And so it's just more moving parts sort of in your annual
budget
and maintenance and routine. We have to be pretty careful to make sure we know when things need oil changes. You say you do all of yours consistently, everything in the spring.
Yes.
We tend to actually keep track of hours because certain tractors get more hours than others, just the way that things work. And so we actually do record hours and then sort of keep an eye on them.
So, we just have done it annually just because so Dad was adamant about everything being changed annually. It's like there's a lot of old pieces of equipment, and just make sure that your filters are your lifeblood, protecting your fuel, protecting your air. So we were overly protective in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are a person that doesn't use your tractors much at all, I would say every other year, you should be changing things like that just for exactly that reason. We put enough hours on most of our things that it gets changed within a year pretty consistently. Of course, the one tractor that's not running doesn't have any hours on it, but also it's not running, and it'll have new fuels and things put into it as
needed.
Comes into commission. So I don't know. How with you having one tractor going out right now for a clutch, what is that going to do for you decision wise?
And so we're thinking about, do we need to lease one? This is kind of the first time we've thought about it. Is this you thought about in the past? We've always thought about at what point do we need to, because most of our tractors are 2 of them are 1976 models and one's a 1990. So they got some years on them. At what point do we need to go ahead and bite the bullet and try to get a newer one, or do we need to go ahead and just rent one and get us through a year and then see how we like that? So we're actively thinking. It's always hard to pull that trigger, to spend the money. But if you have to spend it, we're spending it in time. We're going to lose some time and capabilities, and so then we definitely can't move hay. If we, there are some times where we can move hay while we're baling. It's a rarity. Everything has to be working like clockwork. But we do need some additional capacity, similar to you guys, and so we're thinking about, do we need another tractor?
Well, I'm a big fan of that nice little 4550 horse tractor, I will be honest. But I don't think it's going to move your 5x6 bales. I'm not delusional enough to think that it's going to want to move your 5x6 bales. So the size that you're operating at on those bales changes the size of the equipment. I think both the fact that you use a disc mower and the fact that you do a 5x6 bale really change the size of the equipment, which it doesn't seem like it, but when you describe the size of your equipment, I'm thinking like that 90 horse is not a medium. It's a big tractor here in Kentucky.
Tractor. Yeah, it is a fairly big tractor.
But for a family that's doing 5x6 bales and using a disc mower, that it probably is the appropriate mid-sized tractor for what you're doing on your operation.
Yeah, and it's really, getting those bales. And so I think, for that size 5x6 balers, you technically need at least 80 horsepower just to pull it.
Right.
But then it's also your additional, if you have the hills that you have
Right.
to pull and brake, then that's where you need that little bit additional horsepower for these. And so, we not only have that, but we also have the manure we have to spread from our structure. And so that can be into something else that takes up a fair amount of horsepower.
Yeah, and we will run ours typically with our heavier tractor, which is currently out of commission. So we just spread manure this past week with our smaller 65 horse tractor, and we can do it. It's not a problem, and I have a fairly large manure spreader. So the key is you don't pile it up.
Yes,
because it will try and get away from you on a hill.
Yeah, you don't push the capacity.
And, we also will intentionally, if we know we have to go to a hill, we'll start laying it out on a flat piece of ground and get it emptied as much as we can before we have to go down a hill. Because the last thing you want is for that, because there's no good braking on a manure spreader. It is merely amount of weight pushing you down the hill as fast as it wants you to go. And gravity can really get you some days. So
for that instances like that, really the big tractor helps, but having an escape plan, we still try to have an escape plan even for the big tractor.
Yeah.
In your mind, it's like, well, I'm going to go turn. When I get to the bottom of the hill, I'm just going to turn this way, or have this is the levelest way to turn.
Yep.
When I get to the bottom.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Manure spreaders are a particularly dangerous piece to use on hillsides, but it is important to have a plan for how you're going to handle that. That is one of those pieces of equipment that a lot of people won't account for in sizing their tractors, but
it's definitely, if you're, smaller operations, I could see where they could get away with a ground drive, a smaller one with a ground drive.
Right.
But you get to much larger if we're handling what we both handle, because you have a cow-calf pair that producing 1 cubic foot per head per day, or per pair per day, and so that adds up very quickly over winter.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and that's one thing that I think is interesting on older and newer tractors, because this is not only is it the size horsepower, but it's the weight of the tractor that plays a big role. So you have two 1976 tractors. If you bought the same horsepower in a tractor today, that weight is not going to be the same. So this is one where you want to have the right size, tractor, but the PTO on this is not actually the big demand. It's actually the weight of the tractor and the braking system that tractor has because of its weight. And the engine braking in particular that it has is going to be really important. But those heavier tractors are going to, if that manure spreader tries to slide out from behind you at the bottom of a hill, that big heavy tractor is going to keep tracking in its line a lot longer, even if there's a little bit of pull on that drawbar.
Yep.
Whereas a lighter weight tractor might not do that. So not to say that you should undersize your tractor, but the older tractors are going to be a little bit more insistent upon going where they want to, just because they're heavier.
Yep, they got a little more metal to them, and typically I think a little longer wheelbase, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And so they hadn't quite engineered them to be more compact at that point.
Doesn't turn as good, but it goes straight a lot better. So
yes. Yes, it does.
And maybe that's just like our own humor they're coming through, but I think that's maybe a good spot to stop for today. But I do think it's really important for operations to really make a good consideration, because adding tractors adds a lot to efficiency if you have like one key choke point in an operation. So for us on the hay operation, we had choke points in hauling in hay while we were baling. We've almost eliminated that. Now our choke point is how many vehicles do we want to drive to move wagons back and forth between where we're baling and where we're storing the hay.
Right.
And at a certain point, we will have to cut off and say that this is as efficient as we're willing to get right now for the amount of hay that we bale.
Right.
And so that's kind of important. But certainly we've added on costs by adding on that extra tractor. So it's a trade-off that we're making.
And it's something you have to do, but if you can get that additional time and flexibility, I think it's worth the flexibility in my mind.
Certainly the redundancy gives us a lot more reassurance. If one tractor goes down right now, we're in much better shape to handle a hay operation and we talked to Matt Dixon, and he talked about how the windows are getting shorter for baling hay. For me, that's really important that we be able to get the hay and dry, because it's a big part of our business model.
Hey, he said we have 40 days, essentially, across the state, average of 40 days. And so 40 good baling days. And so we really have to maximize that.
Sure.
I think just having that capability, dynamic capability with additional equipment, it's almost essential in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, Matt, sometimes we struggle. My husband's like, oh, don't we need another? And I'm like, no, we don't need another tractor. And then I think, would there be enough value to justify the costs associated? And sometimes he wins and we get one, but often he loses and we don't.
Somebody's got to be the voice of reason, but sometimes you got to say, what the heck, because live life a little and get another tractor.
Yeah, another project just to sit there in the barn. That's how it works sometimes. But
yep.
That is what it is. And with that, let's go ahead and end the tractor talk and just an update on what you're planning to do on the farm in the next week or so.
Next week or so, definitely still clean up fence lines, and then going around, probably giving out a little bit more hay this week, even though I don't want to, and just make sure I get those cows like just on impulse power, so we get all of our fence lines secured. Then we'll go ahead next weekend. We'll just definitely start moving cows as fast as we can to the grass.
Yeah, one of our goals this week is to check our calves that are in the barn. So we weaned in March. Calves are on feed. They're doing great, but just want to get a weight on them, make sure we know where they're at in terms of daily gain. Make sure that we're giving them enough feed to have them gaining. The market is high right now. It looks to project out well for quite a while, so we may not sell. But if we are going to sell, we want to know what we're selling ahead of time. And so we may get rid of a few animals here and there, but we may hold on to our group of steers and sell a larger group later it'll be interesting. We're still not 100% on our decision, but that's sort of where we're leaning. And I need some weights and information to make decisions.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think, it's definitely a much better market than it was last year, but it still could be volatile. We have to wait and see.
Also, we're breeding alpaca. The males and females are going together as of May 1, so that decision also has to be. Okay. Everyone loves a good alpaca cria baby. So 11 months plus or minus a month from baby alpaca.
Excellent.
With that, I think we will end our podcast for today, and we will be back next week with another topic. We're going to talk some equine stuff because we're coming up on
the Derby.
Derby.
Equine footing, I believe. So take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.